It's 1816. We're on Lake Geneva, the Villa Diodati, which is where Lord Byron, the famous poet, is taking up summer residence. He's there with his personal physician, one Dr. Polidori. Byron has just left England for the last time ever under a cloud of great scandal. His wife had accused him of having an incestuous affair with his half sister. Meanwhile, Percy Shelley, another famous poet, championed by Leigh Hunt, also the champion of the young John Keats. Percy Shelley's fallen madly in love with one Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Wollstonecraft is the daughter of William Godwin, a famous philosopher whose work Political Justice from the 1790s had profoundly influenced Shelley's radical political ideas. And Mary Wollstonecraft is also the daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft, a famous philosopher in her own right who wrote Vindication of the Rights of Women, the first feminist tract in British literature. So Percy Shelley, in visiting Godwin around 1814 or so, falls in love with Mary. He cannot marry her yet. He is married himself to a woman named Harriet, with whom he has 2 children. But he and Mary behave as if they are married. Mary leaves home in 1814 and basically lives with Shelley as his wife. She has had 2 children by him. One named Clara dies premature birth, only lives a few weeks. Another, William, is alive, young, in 1816. So Byron, Villa Diodati with Dr. Polidori. Percy Shelley wants to spend time with Byron, wants to meet Byron, and his partner, Mary Wollstonecraft, are going to make their way from England to meet Byron on Lake Geneva. Along with Percy Shelley and Mary Wollstonecraft is Claire Clairmont, Mary Wollstonecraft's half-sister. She has had an affair with Byron. She's madly in love with Byron. She is carrying Byron's child at this point. So she also wants to get to Byron. So this is why Percy Shelley, Mary Wollstonecraft, and Claire Clairmont make their way to Geneva in 1816, the summer. To repeat, Shelley wants to get to know Byron better, admires Byron's poetry. Byron admires his poetry. Mary Wollstonecraft is essentially the de facto wife of Percy Shelley. They have a child together, William. Of course, they're going to be together, so she's going too. And Claire Clairmont wants to be with Byron, whom she thinks will be her lover. Byron rejects her almost immediately after they arrive near Lake Geneva. So I go into this detail because what will happen in the summer, in June of 1816, is the beginning of the writing of Frankenstein. And there are very special circumstances that contribute to the writing of this novel. 1816 is often known as the summer of no summer. In 1815, in Indonesia, Mount Tabora volcano erupts, one of the strongest eruptions in the history of volcanoes. Tens of thousands of people are killed immediately. And so powerful is the eruption that tidal waves and huge clouds of ash occur hundreds of miles away from the actual eruption point, even to the point where Europe itself by 1816 has its weather patterns affected. The sun is essentially blocked out by huge clouds of ash. And the average temperature for the summer of 1816 in Europe is about 33 degrees Fahrenheit. So the weather, as Mary Wollstonecraft, I'm calling her now because she and Shelley aren't yet married, Mary Wollstonecraft says it was a wet, uncongenial summer. So Percy, Mary, and Claire are staying in a village near Lake Geneva. Byron will invite them over to Villa Diodati so they can hang out and talk about poetry or take boat rides on the lake when the weather's okay. But at a certain point, the weather's so bad that Percy and Mary and Claire have to end up staying with him. And Byron proposes that to pass the time, because of the terrible weather, They can't go outside. Let's have a ghost story contest. Everybody agrees to do this. Got to keep boredom at bay. So Byron writes a fragment of a vampire tale that ends up as part of a long poem. Nothing much comes of his effort. Shelley is just essentially incapable of narrative, so he's unable really to generate much at all. Polidori tries to write a ghost story. It doesn't really come to anything, although a little later Polidori does write the very first vampire story in English. But these three were able to generate their ideas at least pretty quickly. Claire did not participate. Mary cannot come up with an idea, and every morning she's asked, have you had your idea? Have you had your idea? And she just can't come up with anything. But then, as she reports in her preface to the 1831 edition of Frankenstein, she has a dream, and she sees this this harrowed, haunted student, lean, feverish, looking upon this figure, a monstrous figure lying, and a yellow eye opens, and she wakes up. And before too long, she has the first line of the scene in which the monster in Frankenstein, or the creature, becomes animated. It was a dreary night in November, something to that effect. She's 18 years old when she begins writing Frankenstein. And when it's finally published in 1818, she's 20. Published anonymously in 1818. Why is it significant, though, that this novel grows out of this very specific meteorological and societal context? Well, I'll tell you, and this justifies my telling the story. And by the way, there are two films that depict this summer, magical summer, haunted summer, summer of no summer. One is called Gothic, in which Miranda Richardson, who was later married to Liam Neeson, plays Mary Shelley. Julian Sands plays Shelley, and Gabrielle Byrne plays Byron. And then there's another version of this called Haunted Summer. I know that Eric Stoltz plays Shelley in that, but I haven't seen that one actually. The first one, Gothic, I have seen. It's pretty good in a campy sort of way. In any case, here's what I want to say. Frankenstein explores irrationality under the guise of rationality. Victor Frankenstein is deeply studied in science, deeply studied in scientific method, is adept at scientific method. He uses scientific method or logical inquiry to discover the principle of life. He never tells us quite how. And then he applies that principle to the building of a creature that he animates. But underlying this impulse, underlying this project, I should say, is this irrational, emotional, almost unconscious impulse. He wants to overcome death. Why? Well, he never quite says this, but his mom, Carolyn, dies. A terrible death. And it seems that Victor Frankenstein hates death and wants to overcome death. He says, yes, I'll be the god of a race that will worship me like children of Father. But it seems that he just hates death. He hates the limit of death. He has this deep, unconscious desire to overcome death. This deep unconscious desire, we might say, to bring his mother back to life. He can't do that, but in bringing a dead creature to life, it's as if he's doing it in a displaced kind of way that might provide some kind of psychological pleasure. Well, Mary Shelley the same way. I'm calling her Mary Shelley now. Again, when she was at the Villa Diodati, she was known as Mary Wollstonecraft. Not long after she conceived of Frankenstein, Percy Shelley's wife, Harriet Shelley, was found dead in the Serpentine River in London. And almost immediately after that, Percy and Mary got married, and Mary Wollstonecraft became Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley is trying as hard as she can in the Villa Diodati to come up with a story. She's trying to come up with one logically, to think it through in her daytime hours. But only after a dream, which comes from her unconscious, shows her this image of the student and the creature, can she write. So it's interesting to speculate that the birth of her own novel in her unconscious in a place that she can't control with her reason might have carried over into her creating a protagonist who is driven by his own unconscious as well. And even though on the surface he appears to be a scientist pursuing truth rationally, underneath he's driven by, again, these dark, obsessive, irrational energies. So that's one interesting context growing out of this 1816 summer. What's another? The novel is also about the limitations of the natural world. How basically humans are not in charge of their own destiny. Humans are controlled, like all creatures in the world, by the laws of nature. And so if a volcano erupts in 1815 halfway across the world, it could well shut down your pleasure a whole summer in 1816 because we're part of this sort of vast natural network. And we cannot achieve total agency in this world but are dictated by its laws. The novel is very much about Victor not wanting to be dictated by nature's laws. If his summer were shut down because of Mount Tambora, who knows what he might have done. He would have come up with some way possibly to burst the clouds of ash and let the sun shine again. But he is someone who chafes against the main law of nature, which is that everything must die. Everything is always decaying, everything is always dying, and of course that leads to growth in life. Disliking this law, that natural law, everything dies, he pushes against it, he tries to overcome it. Ironically, in his desire to overcome death, he creates a killing machine who eventually kills almost everyone close to him. So that's the second part of this summer that is interesting in thinking about in connection to the novel. And finally, there's something we might say apocalyptic about a summertime that's being shut down, where the sunny world is a dark world and where the warm world is a cold world. And it could well have led someone like Byron to think, okay, the world could end at any time. Any one catastrophe could wipe out all humanity. And in 1816, Byron writes a poem called Darkness, which is about exactly that. All humanity being killed in some vast apocalypse. And Shelley, in a poem he wrote in 1816 called Mont Blanc, imagines the glacier of Mont Blanc kind of creeping over the whole world, again, potentially wiping out humanity. So we have in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein the novel opening and closing in the Arctic, a realm of ice, a realm of death. And the creature does not suffer pain in this cold world. The creature can endure the cold. The creature doesn't need as much to eat, whereas Victor is almost killed by the ice. And Victor fears that if he makes a female companion for this creature, the two will create a new race, a post-human race, if you will. And this post-human race could endure the cold, could endure ice, could endure natural conditions that humans themselves could not endure, and they would die away. So that's one of the fears of the novel. One of Victor's fears is this idea of a sort of post-human race usurping the place of humans, and humans potentially dying out in a world of cold and ice, whereas this post-human race could survive in this realm of cold and ice. So there you are, the Summer of No Summer, Villa Diodati, the Ghost Story Contest, and how this impacts at least three of the major ideas in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.